Hello everyone, it's Ren here. Welcome to my room, guys. Good to see you, and I hope you're doing well today. Today I'm going to try to convince you that really all INFJs are spiritual people, and in fact it's part of the very meaning of identifying as an INFJ that among the many things that you are spiritual. Might sound counterintuitive, but I'm going to try to convince you by deploying an argument that I develop at much greater length in the upcoming book on the INFJ that might come out next month, so stay tuned. And it will be the sequel to this book, The Ecstatic Soul. Currently still the reference book on the INFJ type. If you want a deep understanding of the type, it's a nice product. Look at this man. Look at this dreamer. He's a dreamy man. Well, the link is below. Anyway, support the channel to also get my novel, The Infinite Castle. By the way, the rumor has it the main character is an INFJ. Unhealthy, perhaps solipsistic, perhaps alienated. But if you're into Murakami, Kafka, Dostoevsky, that's also fiction. Supports my channel, and look at this beautiful castle. It's a very nice product. Look, the castle is here too. Okay, so now another very useful and very effective way to support me, if you're interested in supporting me, because I depend on your support. Support me on Patreon. There's a link below there that you can click on, anywhere from like $3 a month. And, if it's added up, it really just helps me. If I need to get some books, if I need to, whatever, it just supports me and it helps. So consider it. And thank you to my supporters. Now, to return to the topic. So the first answer we would like to give, if we take an ordinary understanding, an ordinary language understanding of the word spiritual, the obvious response would be to say, no, not all INFJs are spiritual. We take this ordinary understanding of the term spiritual as someone who engages in spiritual activities, not necessarily high intensity or high commitment. Spiritual activities can be low intensity, low commitment, but still, maybe they do, can go from anywhere from doing meditation to tarot to engage in some like mystical experiences or read lots of spiritual books and get inspiration from that. I would say that it's probably like 25% of the population of INFJs who would identify as spiritual in that ordinary sense. Another 25% are probably agnostic. They don't know really, like, maybe I'm spiritual, maybe I'm not. I can't really tell. So, shrug my shoulders and I don't know. And then you have another 50% that probably would just say, no, I'm an everyday INFJ. I'm a good citizen. I do my things. I have my life. And I resonate with stuff, but spirituality, I don't dislike it. I'm democratic and I'm open to it, but I wouldn't say I'm spiritual. I don't resonate with that literal definition. So again, this is something I discuss in my book, so you'll see when you get the book. But ordinary language, something that you always need to remember, and that's very useful also when we think of the language of the personality community as a whole. Not the specific personality community of like very theoretical models like cognitive type or Harry CPT, or perhaps slightly looser models like objective personality and so on. We're talking about the personality community as a whole. It's like messy, it's fuzzy, it's mushy, but it's there. For people to be able to communicate with each other and understand each other, even if it's to ultimately disagree with each other or even hate each other, there needs to be that background condition of intelligibility, which is usually enough vagueness in your language that you can actually communicate with someone who's from of a vastly different type, with a vastly different kind of way of looking at the world, for instance. So it's very important that we have that in our lives, but it's not necessarily the guarantor or of the most satisfying meanings of a particular word or of a particular expression. So here is what I suggest to you, a better definition of spiritual, and I'll then move from that to an argument as to why it's part of the identity of being an INFJ that among the many things that you are spiritual. And of course that has further consequences, but first we need to be able to retrieve and to salvage the idea of spirituality as an existential condition of the INFJ. It's an expression I use in the Ecstatic Soul, and I like that. It's part of the Jungian existentialism that I try to deploy in my work. Consider spiritual more broadly, okay? So for me, the way that I think of it, you are spiritual just in case, right? Just in case. The world, as you experience it, is a world that contains everyday things as well as sacred things. So in other words, if you're spiritual, if in your conception and experience of the world there is a place for the sacred. And I further define the sacred, right, as that which resists our utilitarian thinking and has claims on us, as the power to make demands on us, right? Can be reduced to a principle of utility, means-end thinking, and can be the locus and the site of ethical demands, religious demands, or otherwise. Okay. So utilitarian means-ends thinking, very, very, very prevalent nowadays, more than ever in the West, spreading out, globalization and so on. It's certainly spreading out. And means-ends thinking, utilitarian thinking for short, is the idea that things that are in the world, anything that exists, has value just in case it can be furthered, it can be furthering you towards some end, right? So that's the means-end thinking. It usually is connected, so on the one hand, with a very strong belief in technology and technological development, right? And it's also very linked, obviously, with the concept of efficiency. The more valuable a thing, the more efficient it is. And with the concept of transparency. That is to say that if you want to have maximal efficiency, maximal utility, you need a mechanistic background understanding, which is, you find that a lot in science, where you need to be able to articulate a problem and the solution to it in ways that are transparent to reason. So it needs to have, in terms of the articulation, it happens in language, it needs to be very clearly articulated. It needs to be immediately understandable. It needs not to be obscure, elusive, clouded, or otherwise, right? In the West, and I've talked about this before, there's a huge onus that's placed as regards intelligence and as regards value in people's intellect, communicative ability, and so on this idea of transparent rationality. To be rational is to be transparent. You can clearly define the state of affairs, starting state of affairs. You can clearly define the modalities of a project toward achieving a subsequent state of affairs, and then you can clearly define what the subsequent state of affairs is to be, and once it takes place, you can articulate it. And it's true that intellect is very often, I think it's predominantly a Western thing originally, but it's spread out. It's associated with fluidity and transparency of reasoning. If someone reasons fast and you can immediately understand what they're saying, it tends to be seen as valuable, intellectually valuable, but also ethically valuable. Now, what I want to say is that this mode of relating to the world is implicitly, it's not often put, sort of to the forefront, it's implicitly linked with a mechanistic conception of what the world is like, which is very, very influenced by science and technological thinking, and has the inevitable tendency to see everything in terms of means and ends and cause and effects. Right? And the result of this is that, if you like, things in the world become effectively, all things that are things, experienced as things and beings, become reinterpreted very quickly in a way that we don't even realize we're doing as objects, right? The world is composed of objects. There's subjects, there's like human beings, and then, animals, but they can also be objects. And so we are subject and object. We are subjects relating to objects, the implication being that objects are there to be of some use to us. Utilitarian thinking, which they can be of best use when we can clearly and transparently articulate how that use can be furthered for some ends. And the ends, deployed, the ends articulated could be, on the surface, very good ends, welfare state, more income equality, more income full stop, better redistribution, protection of the environment, so on. But what's important to realize is that that kind of world, which Max Weber calls a peculiarly disenchanted world, and the concept of disenchantment in Weber is fundamental to describe the condition of modernity. The disenchanted world, essentially a world that has been emptied of meanings. That's to say, it's like you see a tree, the means ends thinking is to say, either it can be used as a resource, or it can be used as a decorative part of a garden or whatever, right? That's actually still means ends, because it's, in some sense, the idea is that the tree is there to give you something, to achieve some ends. So whether it is to provide wood for fuel, it can also be to provide an ecstatic experience for your pleasure, for the pleasures of other people. In the past, when people related to trees as deities, of course that was spiritual. Because in this case, the tree was sacred. The tree wasn't there only in relation to an expectation that you had defined, consciously or not. Being aesthetically delighted, being made warm during winter, or whatever else it might be. The idea that the tree exists in and of itself and for itself and has the power to make demands on you. If you're worshipping, say like a concretistic deity in the shape of a tree, in the case of some tribes, of course the tree can make demands. So that's encountering the tree as something sacred. And of course we see the notion of the sacred in religion today too. The sacred, for example, if you take the Catholic religions, it has very strong sacred undertones and overtones in relation to particular saints, in relation to particular relics, in relation to particular holy sites. These are not there. The relationship is not utilitarian. It's not means ends. It would be wrong to say that the relationship consists of being made to feel liberated or inspired. That's a really profoundly spiritual and or religious person would not relate to that. The idea is that things in the world are not just there to be of use to us, right? Now, what's interesting about this is that usually, in order to redeem that non-instrumental relationship we have to things in this case, we need to be able to articulate in language. But the transparency that we have in the case of the utilitarian relationship is not there. It's not there because the meanings that things have for us can't be rendered in terms of a mechanistic frameworks and means and ends. And the thing is always, in some sense, the being of that thing is always in excess of what we are trying to make of it as an object. It's always exploding, if you like, the bounds, the sort of limits we're trying to set on it to objectify it. And that comes across in language. In a way, a thing as opposed to an object, or a being as opposed to an object, is never going to be captured in a single description. It's always going to be in excess, right? And so that's how you encounter the sacred in language. Now, how does this relate to INFJs? Think about the NI function. Now, of course, we could try to argue that, well, the NI function is connected to the archetypes, and the archetypes are closely connected to, their primordial images, which, through their connection with timelessness, or rather eternity as gathered time, is going to place you in the context of a site of meanings that is non-instrumental and therefore brings you to the sacred. You can make that argument, but I want to use something kind of more straightforward. What happens with what I call the haziness of prescience, an essential phenomenological experience, a phenomenological dimension of experience of being an NI dominant? One of the ways you know you're an NI dominant is if you experience the haziness of prescience. So as you remember, if you read my books or watched my videos before, the haziness of prescience is not foreknowledge. It's not a sense that it's not knowing something without being able to explain it or knowing something in advance. There's a very crucial distinction between that, which is what it is not, and the feeling or the profound conviction in your bones that you know or can foretell something. So you see the difference. It's not that you know and that you know yourself to know, it's that you strongly feel yourself to know. You feel it in your bones. That's the haziness of prescience. But when people try to, they're like, come on, Ren, tell me, so what is it that you know? And then people are very frustrated, like they don't really know it. All you're able to tell me is just this weird metaphorical language. And they're disappointed. They're like, don't tell me that, like these similes and these symbolic little tidbits or aphorisms or that, somewhat poetic metaphorical language is your knowledge. Knowledge is not that. Knowledge is transparent to reason. It's not that. And you're thinking, and I is an intuition of the sacred. What I say in the book is, contrary to what a lot of the literature gets us to think, and I is not about, right, the foretelling of new knowledge, right? And I is about the perception of new meanings, human meanings. So when you're an NIU dominant, what you experience and that you find very difficult to tell others is you get an intuition of something very meaningful that you can't articulate. So it's not knowledge in the sense of instrumental knowledge that you foretell. Is that you're able to see what others can't see, which is an intuition of meaning. Something is meaningful, an event, set of objects, set of relationships, cross time, cross space, maybe within time, within space. It can be in many different things. But you can't quite describe it in a way that's satisfactory to a lot of people because you can't do it transparently. You can't do it transparently. Why? Because a symbol is not transparent. An archetype is not transparent. It's meaningful, sure, but it's not transparent. It's elusive, it's clouded, and it's cryptic. These are all qualities of things whose nature is in excess of what we can transparently describe them as. In other words, there are things that you can't thingify, that you can't objectify. There are things that have an existence in and of themselves. Right? They're sacred things. So NI is really nothing but, ultimately, an intuition of the sacred in the world. Not the sacred as a religious experience. It can be given a religious direction, but it doesn't have to be. But this sacred as that irremediably and irreducibly meaningful existence that can make a claim on you, but can be captured in purely transparent descriptive language, hence the metaphor. It's a metaphor because you're trying to get to grips with the meaning. What is it? You sense there is meaning, but you can't quite pin it down. You need to work through it until the metaphor has become so well worn and integrated the language, if it's successful, that it becomes a dead metaphor and now it's just part of the language. But NI is always there at the start, creating new metaphors, new ways of world making, like Nelson Goodman says. And that ultimately for me is an intuition of the sacred. And that's why INFJs functioning like this are all quintessentially spiritual beings. Let me know what you think in the comments, guys, and I'll see you at the weekend. Ciao.